we've just started opening registration for our national conference, and we hope you'll join us on November 17th for a discussion on Australia's global role in an increasingly fractious global environment. Today's event, though, focuses on a topic of growing strategic importance: China's evolving defense engagement in Southeast Asia, particularly through minilateralism. We'll hear about what minilateralism is, but I think it's safe to say that it's a flexible and targeted cooperation between smaller groups of states. As China seeks more agile responses to regional challenges, its shift towards minilateralism perhaps raises questions about the future of regional security architecture and the stability of contested spaces, like, for example, the South China Sea. To help us unpack these dynamics, perhaps from a Chinese perspective, we're honored to host Associate Professor Bo Ma, currently a visiting fellow at the Australian Centre on China in the World at ANU. Dr. Ma is also Assistant Director at the China Centre for Collaborative Study of the South China Sea at Nanjing University, and brings with him a deep and well-rounded perspective on Chinese foreign policy and security thinking, grounded in both academic research and regional observation. His publications and commentary have reached audiences across Asia, the United States, and Europe, and today's talk promises to offer fresh insight into how China's minilateral engagements may reshape the balance of influence in the Asia-Pacific. To our online guests or attendees, please feel free to submit your questions via the Zoom Q&A function throughout the talk. You don't need to wait till the end of the talk to submit your question. And now please join me in welcoming Dr. Bo Ma to the podium. Thank
you. Thank you, Bruce, for the kind introduction, and I'm so honored to be here at the AIA meetings. I told my wife that I'm coming here, and because she's not in this field, she said, "What is so special about this organization?" I say, "Well, you have to really pay to come to sit in the lectures. The last time you pay, people to pay to see me is when in my 1-year-old birthday. People give me the red envelope, so it's a real milestone for me. Thank you so much for inviting me here. So today the topic is one that has been discussed a lot, both in China and I believe in this country as well. So my perspective is what China think of the minilateralism, mainly dominated by the US, whether China will form its own minilateralism. So this talks will be divided in 4 parts. First, I will speak a little bit about minilateralism, just in case you're not so familiar with the concept. And then I will say what China's officials and the scholars think of minilateralism. Third is the growing trend of China's minilateral security collaboration with Southeast Asia countries, ASEANs. Because China has minilateral collaboration with Central Asia countries. Recently, you might heard of this security bell. They're doing this Navy drills with Iran and Russia. That's also one. But I'm using Southeast Asia as a case study to give you more illustration on how it proceeds from the China's perspective. And in the end, I will speak a little bit about the prospect, I think, for the minilateralism. Minilateralism is usually you need to have at least three members, but there is actually no fixed count, right? So it's a small group corporations, which they can enhance decision-making efficiency. Not like the UN, then you have to get a unanimous decision sometimes, or by vote, which slow down the whole process, like a global change, climate change negotiation that take years to conduct. Minilateralism is famous for its efficiencies, and also be very flexible, and it can be informal. So the leadership of your country can just meet in some ad hoc meetings, and then consensus has been made, and they make announcements, and things can be done. So there will be also lower exit cost, and also it can be very adaptive. It can expand and shrink, and sometimes it can just dissolve. So it can actually avoid dialogue in the multilateral forum. Uh, the famous case of minilateralism can be the following, right? The Quad. With US or Japan, India, Australia. Actually, the origin is from 2020, sorry, 2004. It was actually, at that time, there was a tsunami in the Indian Oceans. So they formed this Quad. And then later on, this idea actually died because nobody felt interested any longer at that time. The US wanted to counter terrorism, but later on, they're a little bit absent-minded about this. So, but it really revived a couple of years later because the rise of China and the geopolitical conflicts in the South China Sea, right? And then these countries are very familiar with the AUKUS, right? Focus on solely on submarine buildings and technology corporations in the so-called Pillar Two, if there is a one Pillar Two. And also there are some talks about this squad that include the Philippines to some multilateral collaborations. Also, this chip 4 is mainly focused on the semiconductor supply chain buildings. So it's not necessary only in the security domain. It can also be in the economic domains. So what China think of minilateralism? Officially, the Chinese leaderships never speak about minilateralism. In Chinese, it means 小多边. They never use this phrase. What they say, they actually rarely use minilateralism. When they say this type of cooperation, they usually refer to open minilateralism, right, as supplement to multilateralism. And the exception is President Xi Jinping said a few years ago at a SCO summit, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, that expand small multilateral collaborations. And Liu Jinsong, who is the division chief of China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the Asia division, said China can participate in small multilateral meetings, right? So that's the way they go. One of the reasons is because the Chinese is very critical about the U.S. lead multilateralism, like the Quad and AUKUS. So they feel if we speak about multilateralism, that means we actually endorse these concepts. By the way, the Chinese never officially use Indo-Pacific. When we must use Indo-Pacific, we have to quotation marks, right? It's because China still feel we have to focus on and keep using the concept of Asia Pacific instead of Indo-Pacific. But the Chinese do criticize quite a lot on the U.S. lead Indo-Pacific multilateralism. They believe it's a design, it's a grand design to contain the rest of China. But I think this concept is gradually changing because actually some government media actually approach scholars like us, want us to do more research on multilateralism because this is a concept. It can be neutral. It can be used by the U.S. It can also be used by the Chinese. So I wouldn't say never, but maybe in the future, the Chinese will gradually start to use this concept. But academically, it's a very different. Scholar actually sense the importance of minilateralism quite early. This is me and my associate did some research on the journal article published in top Chinese journal. Here you have the SSCI, Social Science Citation Index. In China, we have the Chinese, it's called CSSCI. They're like top Chinese journals. So we do the keyword search on minilateralism. It come with in their title. Okay, it come with in 2015. There's only one article talk about minilateralism, but you can see in the past couple of years, every year there are like more articles talk about minilateralism as the titles. So what are they really doing research on? So we also make these figures. The vast majority of the Chinese academic article on minilateralism talk about the U.S. security multilateral collaborations. Also, a few of them talk about the economy side, and some talk about Japan and India's participations. Some talk about ASEAN's response towards it. Actually, me and my team are working on a European perspective on multilateralism and their Indo-Pacific practice. If you look at those 32 articles, speak about multilateralism as the main topic, uh, 60% of them are actually funded by the Chinese National Social Science Funds, which is the most prestige funds in China. It's a government-funded project. So meaning many of these articles actually have some government backgrounds. At least some of their um, uh, outcome will come to the government and make a reference for the government decision makings. That means the Chinese government getting more and more interest in this concept. So overall, I think China believes multilateralism is pragmatic supplement to so-called genuine multilateralism, right? So we always call the U.S. so-called multilateralism is a fake one; it's not a real one. Uh, and the key distinction is the Chinese endorse so-called open multilateralism, and they oppose exclusive U.S. lead blocks, right? So I think they would like to use the word open multilateralism to make a distinction with the U.S. lead security alliance. Um, but so far, it's mostly still academic analytical concept, not integrated well into the government officials' political discourse. And then I will talk about China's multilateral collaborations with Southeast Asia countries, ASEANs. So this is the a paper we are about to publish. So we look at assess Asia military balance, and then we found information from Chinese Ministry of National Defense and look at the security side of these collaborations. So we dated the bilateral, the multilateral, and the multilateral. So you can see the trends. The multilateral is actually growing in the past few years. So it's not just bilateral and multilateral, meaning in the ASEAN framework, but China will select a few ASEAN countries to participate with them on uh, issues, but both sides feel interest. Um, this type of multilateral collaboration is under ASEAN framework, like ADM plus, like 2024 COBA goal with U.S. Japan. That's multilateral security participation cooperation. Then you have these bilateral ones, famously with Laos and Cambodia and with Thailand. And then it comes to this minilateral. In 2016, it's only one, then 2014, four. And things really getting stopped during the COVID, right? Because nobody can really going out and coming to China at that time. But then after the COVID, after the lockdown, that you see the rebound to four and the five in the following years. Uh, so besides this, the numbers surge, you we will also find some trends. First is this multilateral security cooperation are becoming more and more stable, right? Like the Lantang Mekong Joint Patrols. It's a monthly patrols, and it's happened like 12 times a year. And this so-called Vision Joint Crackdowns. It's Israel's until 2024. And also you have China-ASEAN Joint Maritime Exercise, but for some reason there is no follow-up. Um, Obviously, there are more countries to join and higher inclusivities in the Aman UE exercise, grew from 3 countries in 2018 to 6 in 2023. So this is the areas of focus for this type of multilateral, sorry, multilateral security cooperation. Number one is to combat terrorism and transnational crimes, right? Particularly the Mekong River Joint Patrol, because back to like 15 years ago, there would be like pirates in the river, right, to hijack the Chinese ships and also neighboring countries' ships. So China initiated this patrols and to fight terrorism and crimes. Also, this disaster response and humanitarian assistance. For instance, this mine cleanings and the maritime rescues. Those are also themes the Chinese conduct with relevant ASEAN countries. And also, they try to do this mutual trust buildings to enhance military communication, safeguard South China Sea, peace. At least that's what the Chinese openly said about. So this is the numbers uh, of the country that involved in China's minilateral security cooperation. Uh, to many surprise, actually Thailand ranked number one, right? Uh, you see, Thailand is actually a U.S. treaty allies in Asia, right? Maybe the in ASEAN country only two countries like Thailand and the Philippines, the U.S. treaty allies. Singapore is like a de facto ally, but not in name. Right. So China actually, sorry, Thailand actually maintain very close defense tie with China. I give you example in the uh, past months, Thailand Cambodia border conflicts, right? So after the conflicts, when the ceasefire reached, the deal reached, the Thailand said the Thailand side actually came out to the public and to thanks both China and the U.S. for negotiating the peace. But the Cambodia side actually only say we thank the U.S. for negotiate the peace, but they carelessly didn't mention China. So we really want to know what happened. But at least that can indicate that Thailand has a very strong defense tie with China, right? And then, not surprisingly, you have Laos has the second most participation of this China's minilateral security practice, and then Myanmar, Vietnam. Uh, if you look at a country that has extremely close diplomatic and political tie, like Cambodia, actually only have one. But because this is only minilateralism, and China and Cambodia conduct a lot of bilateral security collaborations, right? And actually, we have a zero with Indonesia in this multilateralism. It's very interesting. We need to explore the reason. Um, so the main form is three, right? Join the maritime drills, right? Like the peace and friendship exercise, ASEAN China join the drills, right? Second is joint patrols, like China, Laos, Myanmar, Thailand, Mekong joint patrols, right? To maintain Mekong River waterway secure and in orders. And then you have the training exercise, like international mine cleanings training course, right? Doing mine cleanings. So what about the future of China's and ASEAN's multilateral security uh, collaborations? I do find some constraints and challenges. Um, Obviously, the South China Sea sovereignty dispute is the most serious one that can direct affect, right? Because if you do this maritime collaboration with China, then it's easy to be considered as your sided with China. Uh, since South China Sea is a sea you cannot really avoid. So then it will send signal to the U.S. and to country like Philippines that to jeopardize ASEAN centrality of right. So if the South China Sea dispute become serious, I guess some of the multilateral arrangement might actually be put on to a stop. Also, U.S.-China rivalry in the Indo-Pacific also affect countries' decisions. Um, we know that the U.S. has been pushing its own Quad and AUKUS and some new initiative involve Philippines in these regions, right? So if China form its own, doing similar thing, they will give the U.S. a perception that you're actually picking side with one or the others, right? So that doesn't really look good. Most of the ASEAN countries would rather to work on a middle line. They hate to pick sides between China and the U.S. In China, we have long been have the phrase that the economy ASEAN really depends on China, but in security they still have to rely on the U.S. Look at the recent Thai and Cambodia conflicts, right? It's actually the U.S. They came in and broke the ceasefire, right? The Chinese may play some role, but at least the role is not very strong for from the outsider. And because of the structure of the minilateralism, it's ad hoc, it's a little bit informal, so this can be fragile. For instance, if the leadership for Thailand decide to pull out from this multilateral security arrangement, it's easy to be done, right? That's why uh, there are observers worry about the future of AUKUS and worry about the future of Quad, right? Both in this country and in somewhere else, because given the current U.S. government is not really keen on this security alliance, it's more like they want to do deals, right? They give high tariff to India, Japan, and even Australia, which constantly have a uh, trade deficit with the U.S. The U.S. still wants to put a higher tariff on this, so it will actually erode the confidence of mutual trust. Also, speak about AUKUS. I think a couple of weeks ago, when the reporter asked Donald Trump about AUKUS, actually he didn't really understand what AUKUS is, right? And there have been the U.S. side want to have the review of the AUKUS, whether it really serve America first. Because if you build submarines, nuclear submarines, maybe you should go for U.S. first instead of going for some other countries, right? So the change of leadership is actually making this a change of domestic policy will make this unilateral arrangement fragile. That also apply to China's involvement with multilateralism. Um, Another thing is, I feel because most of this multilateral security arrangement hasn't been really put into severe tests, right? Because nothing really, no really real conflicts broke out in the South China Sea, right? So it doesn't really need Quad to intervene, right? They do have a joint exercise or drills, but will they really play a role when the conflicts broke out? We don't know. But if you look at China's multilateral security cooperation, so like let's say the security belt with Iran, Russia. When Iran get bombed by Israel, you don't really see Russia and China come to the rescue, right? Right. So, but if there's no war, I assume they will continue this type of exercise. But once the real conflicts broke out, well, the big country, the partner actually come to help. We actually be put down to a big question mark, right? Um, so the answer is still we don't know because we haven't been put onto this test. Even the U.S. side hasn't been put on this test in the Indo-Pacific. What about the development trajectory? I think for China, definitely it will go along with these multilateral roles. So they will play focus more on the deeper functional corporations, right? Like disaster relief and counter piracy, law enforcement. Everybody like that. It's not in high policy, right? It's in the middle and low policy. So I think it's easier for China to do these things with ASEAN countries. But once this type of collaboration involved with sovereignty or some defense commitment, I think ASEAN countries will be very careful if they want to join. And even they want to join, maybe I would assume that will be under the ASEAN framework all they do it bilaterally with China, not through this minilateral mechanism. So the minilateralism still has its limits. And then China definitely wants to gradually institutionalize this minilateral security corporations, right? For instance, when Quad was formed, it's the second Quad, in 2017. Initially, it had some security arrangement, but then they expand a few working group, like the vaccine working group during the COVID, like economic working groups, some cyber working groups. So they also want to expand their area of common interest. So I would assume the Chinese will probably do the similar thing. Chinese is very good at doing economic development. So I wouldn't be surprised if the Mekong River uh, joint patrol expand to some area related with economic development. Uh, I think some of the multilateral security cooperation will probably gone, but some will probably join more ASEAN country to join. So it really depends on if this can get consensus from all parties, right? So I would think there will be incremental expansions, but not transformations. But eventually, China in this region, particularly in the South China Sea areas and in the uh, even more broadly in the Asia Pacific, China want to be a security provider and do the be as a agenda shipper. Um, but so far, I wouldn't see China will in the foreseeable future will not do what the U.S. has been doing to openly discredit the multilateral. You still hear the Chinese leadership constantly say, "We want this current world system work better." It means UN central world system, right? That means multilateralism. So I do believe unilateralism can be a complementary, but not the defining issue in China's security agenda in the days to come. I think that concludes my talk, and I'll be more than welcome to answer question with either unilateralism or more broader security concern in the Indo-Pacific region.
Great. Stay at the podium, please.
Sure.
Okay, fantastic. That's a great explanation of how China views minilateralism. Um, I guess I do have a comment and a question before I open it to the floor. Um, the first is, I mean, I found it quite interesting how you sort of characterized the Quad as starting out as an arrangement focused very heavily on defense and security and strategic issues, and then expanding into economic issues. And you framed it as a kind of expansion of the role of the Quad. I'd actually see it a little bit differently, personally, in that it started out. You're right. It was called the Quadrilateral Strategic Dialogue, which is now a name which has been jettisoned. But I think it's been jettisoned because that sort of arrangement didn't work, and the United States and Japan and Australia saw the value in the Quad at bringing India into the fold. India was less enthusiastic about the strategic dimensions of the Quad, and therefore the three partners have kind of pivoted to look at other issues that would entice India to stay on board, if you like. That's my own view on that. So I wouldn't see it as an expansion as such. It's more of a shift. Um, I wonder, though, and this is, I guess, the question. Don't know how to formulate it. The one thing there is obviously a fundamental difference between a lot of the minilaterals that have popped up, as you rightly say, based on the United States, in that a lot of them are already based on US alliances, right? So you did sort of say at some point, you know, you did question whether or not they have lasting effect, whether or not um, if there is some kind of conflict, whether or not the minilaterals will play a role. I mean, do you think perhaps it's a little bit different with minilaterals that do have that sort of grounding in an alliance plus concept, and other minilaterals, the minilaterals that China probably has because it doesn't have that bank of alliances that the United States has?
Hmm. All very nice comment and the questions. I definitely agree with you. I think you're right. Maybe I need to twist my word a little bit. Yeah, you are right. Quad it doesn't really start as a security alliance at the beginning. At that time, actually, our Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Wang Yi, when people ask him about what do you think of the Quad, actually he initially he didn't think this is a anti-China project. So he actually is adopt a wait and see position towards it. But obviously later on, the perception really changed, given the heightened tension in the South China Sea and the worsened relation between China and the U.S. and China and Japan and China India, uh, and briefly China and Australia. But I will say the Chinese is really concerned about the Quad and the AUKUS as well, because the as Anthony Blinken actually once said, the Chinese is afraid of alliance system because China is a country choose not to have alliance. Right? We only have a former treaty alliance is North Korea, but that's really from like a half a century ago, right? Longer than half a century ago. That's just a legacy. The treaty has been uh, automatically renew unless you stop it. But China doesn't really believe alliance, and many scholars in China criticism that the U.S. have this alliance system because a big country and a small country will not be equal. So if you have alliance, that means either you are either the one to be bullied or you're the one to bully the others. So Chinese, from its own bitter experience in the 50s and the 60s with the Soviet Union, they decide not to have alliance, and also actively participate into this non-aligned movement. But the Chinese can also count because they feel if we combine the military expenditure of the U.S., Japan, India, and Australia together, it's quite sizable, and it's very difficult for China to deal with this if they do come together and they do speak in one voice. And AUKUS is even more direct, right? Help Australia to build nuclear capabilities, and which country in this region need you to use nuclear submarines. Obviously, the potential target is China, right? So China has this constantly worries and even fears towards the military grouping of U.S. lead alliance systems. That's my answer to the comment. And to the question whether China's own practice of minilateralism will be different from the U.S. minilateralism, uh, actually the answer is we don't know, right? Because the Quad and the AUKUS haven't been put onto test, right? And even the U.S. treaty alliance, will really the U.S. come to help if its ally get bombed or get into conflicts with China? We still don't know, right? In 2012, when China and the Philippines, Manila had the Scarborough Shore standoff, when the Manila retreat and the Chinese took over the control of the Scarborough shores. Actually, the Filipino came to the U.S. and want to invoke the alliance articles, and the U.S. need to protect us. But then Hillary Clinton, then Secretary of State, gave Manila option to go for the international arbitration court to sue China in the arbitration case instead of helping it militarily to take the control back, right? So I think for China, you're right. We have the constant worry. Well, this U.S. alliance system actually will do what it says, but I think it hasn't been really put onto a test. It's also a debate inside China whether if we do have a conflict with Philippines, well, the U.S. actually came to help. This is also a debate.
Yeah. I don't know.
That never
Maybe
happened.
I should clarify. I mean, I wasn't saying that I actually think that the minilaterals would activate in a. And I get this in Europe a lot, actually.
Mm,
When I go to Europe, and it's sort of reflected in your comments a little bit. The minilaterals around the Indo-Pacific are often poised as a proto-NATO, and I know that China often uses that terminology as well. And I don't think that's quite right, right? I mean, because these minilaterals around the Indo-Pacific, a lot of them have very, very specific functions. I mean, you sort of said, will AUKUS activate? AUKUS isn't an alliance; it's a defence provision mechanism for Australia, right? For all three partners, actually. Anyway, I'll stop hogging the mic because there's a question over there. Could you speak into the mic so that people at home can hear?
yeah.
Thanks very much for your analysis. I'm just looking at your last slide here, and it says under second last dot point under developments and trajectory, China is security provider and agenda shaper. Now, you will be very much aware, I think, that Australia is very concerned about China's engagement in the Pacific, which Australia and New Zealand have sort of seen as their sphere of influence. So we know from the media what what broad outlines, what sort of the arrangements are, but it says China is security provider and agenda shaper. So what do you think the agenda is in the South Pacific?
Mm. Uh, should we collect a few questions or just answer? Okay, good. Yeah, because I don't have a paper and pen, I will usually forgot. It's excellent questions. What China's agenda would be in the South Pacific? I don't think there are a few. So I will be very honest with you. I think one is to expand its influence, right? Um, as our leadership actually said, whenever there is Chinese interest, our security capability also need to follow there, right? So there has been a lot of case that the Chinese business was being hurt because the Chinese government didn't really have the capacity to intervene before. Um, that was previously. So I think right now the government's mindset is whenever there are Chinese interests, the Chinese securities uh, also needs to follow up to this part of the world. And China definitely have quite many economic interests in the South Pacific, right? One is probably the fissions, and also politically speaking, there are countries in the South Pacific recognize Taiwan, right? So there will be a constant competition of recognitions. Also, there are some bigger concerns. For instance, China feel being besieged by the U.S. and the U.S.-led alliance. The U.S. openly say this island chain, right? So they want to keep China at bay. So the Chinese leadership feel we have to also come to where the U.S. has the least influence. That's one is Central Asia. The other is probably the South Pacific. But this part of the world has been long neglected by the U.S. So when China openly said we want to come to these areas, we want to initiate a lot of development project, the U.S. immediately opened like two embassies, right? So you actually divert the U.S. interests from the offshore of China to other part of the world. It actually relieve China's pressure facing the U.S. In its doorsteps. But I do feel uh, dominant country in in this region probably feel a little bit unease, right? Like Australia and New Zealand, you say. I don't know if you consider South Pacific as your own backyard, but I would say when China come to this part, it actually wants to have a inclusiveness. It wants to have a dialogue with the dominant country in this part of the world. like Australia and New Zealand? Are we doing? Maybe we can come together and do something. For one thing, like climate change, right? The current U.S. government is not really keen on talking about climate change. But I study the concern of this island country. They're constantly worried about the rise of the sea levels. Some country may actually be submerged in the next few decades, right? So, because I have this broader broad idea that when China do land reclamation in the South China Sea, if it can make a rock into a land, a big land which can land Boeing 737, how maybe they can help the South Pacific to have this land reclamation to help them to preserve their territory. So, well, Australia and New Zealand be on board to deal with climate change. I think is one of the potential opportunity. And second, well, country in this part of the region help to have some reach some, I don't know, like a fishing agreement, because the Chinese has huge demands on fish stocks, right? So this country, they're also rich in fish resource. So maybe country can reach some consensus on this uh, fishing uh, 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 agreement. So I think there are plenty of potential for China can collaborate with both Australia and New Zealand, because I know that Australia's mindset is you have the responsibility to help this South Pacific country to develop, right? So I think maybe China have a similar goal. So let's see if we can do something jointly, right? But that would be a fact that I think people and politicians in this country have to get used to the Chinese to have a more presence in this part of the world, because it's growing, right, and it wants to expand its influence, not necessarily in a very negative way, but yeah, that's probably my answer.
All right, we have a question here from Ian Lang. And yes, could you please identify yourselves when you ask your questions and let us know where you're from? What do you think are the key reasons China has not had minilateral engagements with Indonesia, considering that the country's growing economic importance considering the country's growing economic importance regionally?
I don't know. We have some. I think for Indonesia, we respect their role in ASEAN country, as they always claim themselves as the leaders, because this is the largest country in this part of the world, in ASEAN, and has the most population of Muslim population in the whole world. Um, and political, I think both countries are doing quite well. Particularly, they're openly endorse many of China's core concepts, right? Um, and President Prabowo actually said China and Indonesia can probably do some joint development project. We don't have a territorial dispute in the South China Sea with Indonesia, but we do have some claims overlapping the EEZs, right? So when Prabowo make these claims, it's very helpful to release the tension between the two countries. So I think politically speaking and economic speaking, China and Indonesia has a very close collaborations. But so I don't think it's because they're reluctant to participate. I think it's probably geographically they are far away from China. So China having decided how to expand their influence in the near coast of Indonesia. I think Indonesia is also very cautious of bringing the ASEAN's uh, to side with China. So if Indonesia join some Chinese initiative for multilateral collaborations, that will probably be explained by the West that the regional structure is probably shifting, particularly the ASEAN will shift to China. So I think maybe those are the concerns.
Sorry, I know there's another one in the room, but there is there is one that flows on nicely from that, and that's the question of power differentials, right? I mean, when you talk about this, Guy Southern has asked a similar question, which I'm going to sort of elaborate on. When you look at minilaterals, including the United States, one of the facts is that the United States is so far away that it can kind of play as an equal partner, or it can balance itself off with other larger regional powers like India. China is massive, and its minilateral arrangements with smaller players. I mean, you can't deny that there's a power differential there, right? So, how is that managed within these minilateral arrangements?
Very good question. As I said earlier, I feel China's, well, I still consider this is the earliest stage because given the Chinese government never openly said we want to have this minilateral security arrangement with any countries. Um, but I think so far they're not really doing some high politics things, except for with Iran and the Russians. Uh, But with ASEAN countries, I think they're very cautious about not being perceived as as a hegemon or as a bully, not to uh, wishfully to include country that the outsider already feel they're in the Chinese surface of influence, like Laos and Cambodia's. Right? I think if China wants, it can easily form a security alliance or unilateral security arrangement with Laos, Cambodia's. Uh, at least that's three countries, right? Uh, but I think the Chinese will think twice to do this just because it oppose the Quad and oppose the ALCA. It doesn't want to be perceived as doing similar things. Right. So that would be my answer.
Hi, I'm Leo. I'm a year 12 student here, and I'm doing an assignment in my global studies class on ASEAN and looking at like its success in like cooperating with China. My question is in regards to Chinese cooperation and I suppose management of ASEAN. What do you think is ASEAN's greatest weakness when it comes to cooperating and managing its relationship with China?
Sorry, can you say the last because I didn't really get
What do you think is China's greatest? Oh, sorry, ASEAN's greatest weakness when it comes to cooperating?
weakness.
Yeah.
Ah. Uh well, it's like I'm talking bad about ASEAN, right? But you know, ASEAN has been the largest trading partner with China for the past like more than 10 years. Uh, but I think China do acknowledge that there are huge uh, diversity inside ASEAN, right? There are like land ASEAN countries and the maritime ASEAN countries, right? And you have a culturally speaking, they have a secular state like Singapore and Vietnam, and they also have Muslim country like Malaysia, Brunei, and Indonesia, and then they have Catholic countries, right, like a Philippines. So I think for China, we're aware of those things. But then when we talk about ASEAN, the word we like to use is like ASEAN centralities. We want ASEAN to be on the driver's seats to initiate things. And then China wants to be the complement roles. That's number one. The second, there also talk about ASEAN ways. ASEAN way is mainly by consensus, right? They have to reach consensus before they unanimous consensus before they reach any agreements, right? So I think China respect that, and uh, in a way, China also use that, right? Because if ASEAN country wants to come and to condemn China in the South China Sea, then maybe Cambodia will jump in and say, no, we're not doing this. So things will not happen. So that's so-called ASEAN consensus or ASEAN ways, right? Um, but ASEAN, for many observers and only many criticism, is also like a talk shop, right? They like to negotiate things, but they hardly reach unanimous actions. right? That's not really a secret. If you ask the Singaporean, do they want a stronger ASEAN? Probably they will tell you no, because they're a small country with only 5 million people. And then you have a neighbor like Malaysia and Indonesia, and then sometimes the politician come to claim that they want to take over Singapore, right? So they might not want to see a unified ASEAN as well. So a divided ASEAN actually serve interests for many smaller countries there. So I think China don't really have an agenda for ASEAN. But having said that, I would also argue that China doesn't want ASEAN to be manipulated by a few members. For instance, right now, the Chinese is very cautious about next year's ASEAN chairmanship, which turned to Philippines, right? So the Chinese has been through different channel to express the message that the ASEAN should not be used by any one state to push its own agenda. We all know that China and Philippines now has a quite contentious relation in the South China Sea, right? So China already indicated that it doesn't want um, the ASEAN to be used for one country's agenda. But on the other hand, I think for achieving that goal, China also needs to um, accommodate certain ASEAN countries, right? Don't push too hard. So people say, well, the Chinese had a ship collusion like a couple of weeks ago. Maybe we'll have a harder line towards the Philippines. I really don't think so. Yeah, because if you push Philippines harder, that will actually help to unify the ASEAN position, right? And it will be easier for Philippines to push for its own agendas, right? So I think the Chinese want to maintain this balanced relation with ASEAN.
Thank you very much, Professor Ma, for your comprehensive report on China's perspective on multilateralism with ASEAN. My name is Neil Drow. I'm a political analyst with the Times of Israel. As you said, ASEAN countries that are geographically closer to China tend to have a higher frequency of security partnership with China, and countries that are further away, let's say, Singapore and Indonesia, tend to have less, as that chart in a previous slides shown. Um, it is widely known that Singapore has had a security arrangement with the Taiwan island called the Starlight Project since the 1970s, and Indonesia has more than one security arrangements with Australia. Actually, do you think the Chinese government is looking forward to expand its security arrangements with countries that are further away from China geographically in ASEAN to challenge those status quo insofar as security arrangements? Thank you.
Well, I'm sorry to give you this impression, but that's not what I mean. Okay, I don't mean that geographically, if we are closer to China, you tend to have more security arrangement with China. If you look at the chart, sorry, I couldn't go back, but Vietnam is definitely the exception, right? Vietnam, despite has the same communism party in power and the same system, and um, we have multi-channel to communicate with the Vietnamese. They actually had a less uh, exercise, military exercise and security exercise with China. If you compare what we're doing with Thailand, right? So I don't think if you're closer to China, then you tend to have more security collaboration with China. Actually, China and Vietnam actually fight a war in '79, right? And still today, there are these bitter experience. And until like last month, China and Vietnam has the first joint army exercise, right? We had a maritime joint exercise with Vietnam, but we never have an army exercise, but until last month. So I'm sorry I give you the impression that countries closer to China tend to have uh, a more engagement with China's multilateral security arrangement. Yeah. But what is the second part of the question?
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm, yeah. Mm, mm. Right. Uh, I think the China wouldn't really think Indonesia's security arrangement with Australia can compare to the Singapore's with Taiwan, because you have this beside Indonesia and Australia, you have this what's the name? Five defense treaty alliance, right? Malaysia, Australia, New Zealand. Right. So I think China never felt Australia as a security threat to China. Even the Australian come to Taiwan Strait, the Navy, and doing joint exercise with the Americans in the South China Sea, we pretty much feel that has been pushed by the U.S. We really blame the U.S. We don't really blame Australia, and China never feel Australia as a serious security threat to the Chinese interest. So I think that will be very open if Indonesia wants to have a deeper security agreement or exercise with Australia. But having said that, I have to say China is not the only country opposed AUKUS, right? You know, Malaysia and even Indonesia doesn't really quite agree with this, particularly Malaysia, strongly no, right? I think it's because of the defense relation between Indonesia and Australia, they don't have an open no, but I believe in private they are very concerned, right? And the Singapore's relation with Taiwan, it's a very good question. Actually, 2 years ago, I was visiting fellow in Singapore, ASES, Yusuf Isak. I wrote a piece, a policy paper. I actually say this is a potential flashpoint between China and Singapore regarding this Starlight project. So if the Singaporean can abandon this project, that would be the best. Surprisingly, the Singapore policy people said we are not totally opposed to this idea, but since that has been tradition, and Deng Xiaoping gave us a green light in the 80s when we built up diplomatic relations, we're not doing it in high profile, we're doing it very quietly, right? So when the Singaporean came to Taiwan, they just dressed like the locals' uniform, and and then sometimes they speak Chinese. They're very low profile people, so they don't really advertise these things. But you're right. I think in 2015, when the Singaporean armed vehicle having finished their train in Taiwan and then went back to Singapore via Hong Kong, that has been detained by the Chinese. And then the Chinese make it a theme, spoke about Singapore try to violate the one China policy or principle. But that's only because China and Singapore has some dispute at that time regarding Singapore's position towards the South China Sea arbitration case. So, but you're right. I think it's a potential clash points between China and Singapore. But for now, I think China and Singapore maintain quite good relations, right? So both sides pretend this thing never happened and not be an issue between our two countries. Yeah.
Thank you. I just wondered if you could make the contrast, elaborate on the contrast between China's concept of open minilateralism and what it sees as you contrasted it with the US more closed approach, as I think you described it. Thanks.
You want me to clarify? Okay. If I don't want to be political correct or whatever, I think what China really means is that the U.S. Multilateral security collaboration is aimed at containing China, right? And the China's one, despite how serious it is, and it's not really aimed at any countries, right? So it's intended to bring security and prosperity and more public goods to the region and to the recipient countries. That's what the Chinese means. But I'm not saying that's what is it is about, right? Yeah.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks so much. Unfortunately, I think it is unfortunate, we don't hear so much from our from scholars from China, and it is actually quite a good experience to have you here so that we can engage in discussion and debate, because that's what we're all about, of course. And again, there will be more discussion and debate at our national conference on November the 17th, and we've just started making registration open online, internationalaffairs.org.au. So I hope to see you all there. But for now, please join me in thanking our guest speaker, Professor Ma Bo.